it always helps when you have someone tell you that you're not going to make it.
Moran, it's Moran's next.
From the minute go, I only had 30% of the business. I had no credibility. I was asking other people to put $1 million into an idea, which is a piece of paper, into a guy that had no business experience as an ex-footballer on a whim. The chances of you making it are close to zero.
Brad Moran, a professional AFL player turned tech entrepreneur, building multiple companies from the ground up, including CitrusAd, which was sold for over $200 million.
It's only getting harder for founders now. And I think founders need to cut themselves some slack in the sense that they're going to feel.
Brad Moran, welcome to The House Story.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. Why don't we get started? I'd love to just go backwards and get to know a little bit about Brad Moran as a child. Maybe you can just take us through you as a student.
Although I was born at a young age, which is a joke I've never forgotten from one of my sales guys about 6 years ago. And he said it in every sales meeting. I wanted to punch him in the face for saying it because it's a shit joke. My childhood, yeah, I mean, what was I? I was a athletic kid, so I loved sport. Didn't like school that much. I was good. I was very high IQ, I guess, in terms of general things like arithmetic, and hated English. Couldn't read, didn't want to read. Not dyslexic or anything like that, but I just loathed it. I've never read a book in my life until today. Still, I've never read a book. So people always ask me, "What's the best book you've ever read?" It's like, I think I've read a few chapters of one or two, but the Bible's about as far as I go in terms of books. But yeah, I mean, childhood. Grew up in England, Birmingham, very different to Australia in lots of ways. You become an adult by the time you're 9. You have very strong EQ quickly. It's like living in the jungle. It's kill or be killed. You learn how ruthless and how nasty the human race can be when you're sort of in that tribal school age. And I realized it was a tribal school thing when I went back there and showed my kids my school. And I felt anxiety driving past it as a 37-year-old, these 14, 15-year-old kids. And I met a guy from Google actually many, many years later in my business career who said exactly the same thing. I said, "Wow, I love your teeth." Like he had pearls, like great pearls. And he goes, "Yeah, because they're all knocked out by the time I was 20. I'm like, "Oh, that's Birmingham for you." So I left at 15. Thankfully, my parents got us to the Gold Coast, which was probably the best decision we ever made. Australia's a lot of things in terms of, it follows England in terms of very much having a tall poppy syndrome, but has a lot of opportunity here in the sense that a lot of people who are in the sporting world or the business world can be caught sleeping at the wheel. And so there is opportunity. It's not quite like America where it's, you be whatever you can be, because that's a bit of bullshit, really. You are a victim of which family you're born into, what color your skin is, a lot of things that are predetermined to your success. Now, whether you actually use them or make them part of your ammunition to be successful is up to you. But I certainly don't look at my career and go, "Yeah, I worked really hard and I deserve everything that I got." I look back and go, well, if I wasn't born into that family at that particular time, had those particular setbacks, had those particular favors from these people, I wasn't male, I wasn't straight, white, I couldn't have cracked it in certain markets. I couldn't have got these certain things. It's not to say it's not possible if you're not those things, but I'm fortunate to have been gifted with a lot of natural talent, which I try and tell my kids. You've got not a lot of natural talent, but that only gets you to the starting line. Now it's a race, now it's a mental battle, So, yeah, I guess the world's taught me a lot about, if you try hard enough, it won't necessarily discriminate, but I was no fool in knowing that I got a fairly decent leg up. But yeah, I mean, look, growing up's always hard for everybody. You're learning the ropes from lots of different people, and I went through 9 different schools from prep to 12.
Why so many schools?
England, you do schooling differently, so you tend to do infant, primary, senior school, college, university. So there's already 5 in there, even if you do the bare minimum. And then we moved around a fair bit, and then I did a mixture of public and private, and then when I came over here, I had a pretty my 3 years at a private school here, which was relatively tough. So back to your point around how I got into football, basically just politically fell out with coaches and rugby and it's about the dummy and didn't want to play and decided to put my energy into things that I could control. At that age, at 16, I'd realized that there are so many things out of your control, and I was pretty headstrong in terms of I want to control the outcomes of my destiny. So I started rowing, of all sports, and got chucked in the deep end quite literally. Fell out the boat first 10 times, which was fun. And then, I rowed in like the school second eight, I guess, if you like. It was kind of like a team of misfits, and they just chucked me in and said, right, you're racing in like 3 days. So good luck with that. You better learn quickly. And you do learn quickly because if you don't row fast, it all ends up in someone's back and they get real pissed. And so halfway through the race, they're turning around and being like, pick up your shit, basically. So I learned quickly. And then, it always helps when you have someone tell you that you're not going to make it, So they're like, look, you're probably not going to make the first day next year. So just, you can keep trying, but, just to set some expectations. So I said, all right, we'll take a boat home. And we lived on water, and I took a boat home and trained my ass off for like 9 months and turned up to pre-season camp. And first day it was good, broke a school record, broke a national record. And then the next day I came dead last in like 4 of the races that mattered. And so I came crashing back down to earth. And he was, the coach was right there saying, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it. And by the end of the month, the training camp, I made it. And then kept rowing for about 6 months. And the school had a pretty bad tragedy, actually. Some kid almost drowned. And it's a reason why a lot of stormwater drains have been installed into the Gold Coast now, because he actually got trapped inside one. Yeah, so obviously when it rains on the Gold Coast, everyone goes out on the ovals and tries to surf and slide along the ground, but he actually got trapped in one. He survived, but it was pretty horrific. And my rowing coach was his boarding master. So he had a pretty tough time of it. And then once he lost the passion for rowing, it kind of followed with me. And then a mate of mine was like, oh, I play AFL, you're tall. Why don't you come and jump and get smashed every weekend? You're doing a position no one wants to do. I'm like, yeah, sure, let's go do that. So that's how my football career started. I went down to the local club, and a guy there was an ex-professional just by chance. Again, how lucky is that an ex-professional just happened to be there on that night that I was there training for the first time. And he gave me some basic training and said, oh, you've probably got what it takes. They're drafting players like you now. They're drafting athletes and trying to turn them into footballers. I mean, they were badly mistaken, but, you can't help that. But then, my mum and dad caught wind of that, and they're like, right, that's it, AFL. I still wanted to pursue other sports, but, short of my mum coming to school and dragging me by the hair off the ground and taking me to football training, I was sort of forced into it. And I never really liked it that much. I'd never watched it as a kid. I never had a team. I didn't grow up with any sort of idols in that sport. But I picked it up quickly, and I was good, and my endorphin was success, and so I chased it. And, just like rowing, I did everything I possibly could to make it. So, that was 3 or 4 hours of kicking a day, extra running, trying to make myself the best I could possibly be in a very, very short period of time. So I had 12 months before the draft clock was ticking.
And where does that come from? Where does that mindset of pursuing perfection to some extent come from?
Yeah, I mean, obviously when you when you have an exit, you have, I wouldn't say a lot more time because I've had less time than I've ever had, but you do start reflecting on where success comes from. People ask you, why were you successful? And then if they get to the next why, it's okay, why are you perfectionist? Okay, why don't you like failing? Where does that all come from? And I think some of it's biological. I think that you're programmed a certain way. I think people with a higher level of intellect know there are more opportunities for them out there, and they know that they can take a pathway to get to an opportunity. Not to say, I don't listen to Elon Musk much, but he does talk about intelligence also being somewhat of a curse as well. Because, like, one thing I was reading about people, intelligent people, is that intelligent people who aren't successful are the most miserable on the planet, because they knew that they could have been, they had the potential, they had the aptitude, and they basically just, yeah, lazy, didn't want to do it, didn't want the hard yards. And so I think when you're born that way, and then subliminally as a kid, you start to attribute um, endorphins and even like attention and love and affection from people around you, whether it's family, friends, school, with success, becomes a drug. Um, so it's a drug induced type aspect to it. It's a biological aspect to it. And then there's a fear aspect, which is probably the most powerful. So if you said to me, what's the number one thing that drove you to be successful? It was fear. 100%.
Not succeeding?
I'm shit scared of my own shadow. Like, I get up out of in the bed in the morning and still scared. I'm like, I don't know why. Because again, it comes with that hyper intelligence. But like, when you're scared, scared's a weird word to use for it. But when you live in a state of anxiety is just another word for fear. It's your body's natural biological response to its surroundings. And the surroundings of the world as we know it today are not particularly safe in any way, shape, or form, medically, economically. And so when someone like me, has been as successful as I have been in many, many different fields, wakes up and I don't have the confidence that I could go get another job tomorrow, chances a fucking regular guy got, right? But the solace in that is that someone who probably doesn't have my way of thinking probably doesn't think like me. So, this is why intelligent people also aren't, and I don't want to piss everyone off when I say this sort of stuff. They're typically, and it was reinforced by another guy I met the other day, athletes are good when they're intelligent but not overthinkers. The minute that you start to be an overthinker, it helps you to a degree, because what it does is it carves a path, just like in business. It's like, okay, you're really good at getting from, how do I get from A to Z? Z's the exit, A is the starting point. So as someone who's intelligent, you'll work it out very, very quickly. Whether you get from A to Z is then based on perseverance, yes, intelligence, you've got to have emotional intelligence, you've got to be prepared to fail. But I think most athletes don't think that way, and therefore the best athletes in the world tend to play with a little more confidence, a little less fear. This is one of the things I do take from sport to business, is that everyone wants to be a successful tech entrepreneur. Yeah, it's called round numbers. Let's not split hairs for a minute. If you said to someone, if someone came to you and said, I want to be the best NBA player in the world, immediately you would judge their physicality. You'd go, oh, you're 5'3". You're not African American. Your hand span isn't huge. You've got no hand-eye coordination, and you're not fast. So, like, chances are, like, you can have the best mindset in the world. Like, you could be the hardest worker in the world, but the chances of making it are so infinitely small that it's just not worth it. Now, the difference with startups and tech is that we all look the same. Boy, girl, age no one discriminates anymore, because some of the best founders in the world are young. In fact, it went ages the other way. Old people were irrelevant at some point, and then it kind of swung back into the middle like it always does. But the good indication with sport and business is that the sport really teaches you who's got that 0.1% mentality to continue to take shit every day, put themselves through a lot of pain for the eventuation that they may or may not make it. And I think it's the uncertainty factor that has a huge implication on whether you're successful or not. So it's waking up every morning not knowing if today's going to be a good day. If you wake up to burning fires and you still go to work and you still work hard, like, nothing ever rarely goes right in a startup. And it's really about how you handle those sort of situations for the longest period of time, of the people that sort of tend to get there with all those kind of predisposed assets or skills that I was just talking about. So success is not just simply made up by hard work. It's not simply made up by intelligence. It's made up by a whole bunch of biological, neurological factors, situational factors of where you were born, raised, family, what intelligence your parents had and gave down to you, the trauma you received as a child, whether it be at school or at home, because trauma also builds success. You've got to have that hunger. And I find that those people with, trauma throughout their childhoods tend to be the most successful people. So I guess the correlation between sport and business is that they carry similar traits in the sense that you can work really, really hard, but at some point, that work ethic is also going to kill you. It's just when it kills you. So for me, it was kind of like 4 or 5 years into football as I just started burning out really. Repetition, preseason after preseason. My body was starting to burn out. I was starting to not enjoy it. It was very repetitive.
And that, I suppose that negative self-talk's probably not conducive to trying to succeed in elite league footy.
No, and for someone like me who was just success driven, the worst thing that could happen to me is I probably played my best game in my first game. Because I was just had a point to prove, and I peaked really early. So for me, someone who's like success measuring, I'm like, okay, well, I got to play a game, prove all you guys I can actually do it. And then I had a few games where I, did some things that not many players can do, kicked a bag of goals, then did some, I wasn't the best player, but I did some things that others couldn't. I'm like, I've ticked kind of all the boxes I wanted to tick. And then it was kind of interesting to hear Ash Barty talk about her tennis career in that same sense that she became really good because she was performance driven. She wanted to succeed because she had a title in mind or a goal in mind. And her goal wasn't to win 25 majors. Her goal was to win 1 or 2. And that was her goal. She succeeded and that was it. It was done. Why keep going? And so for me, like after 4 years, I'd kind of done everything I wanted to do with some repeat injuries that used to really annoy me. But I found myself becoming a bitter person too. I was like watching from the sidelines, hoping players would get injured, hoping the team would lose because then I'd look better, and they'd want me more. So it does breed a lot of selfishness as well in sport. But it definitely teaches you a lot about resilience, constant setbacks, think you've made it because you got to the AFL. It's like, all right, now you're player 50. You got to get into the 22, and then once you're in the 22, then you really got to be in the top 10 to be safe. So, you're never really safe. And where that transpires to business is work ethic and determination will definitely get you very, very far. But it'll also get you to burn out really quickly as well. And then it's just a case of, can you learn what you need to learn quickly enough to avoid the burnout that effectively kills you and makes you almost paralyzed, which I was when I pretty much started Citrus. It was like day one, panic attacks, couldn't go to work, couldn't go to the office. It's like, I thought I'd recovered from my first startup after 7 months. No, I was just straight back into it. PTSD came straight back, looking for a CEO straight away. I was cooked mentally, physically, and that was 5.5 years.
Is that go hard mindset, I suppose, a mindset of sheer discipline and also just high work ethic? Does that come from parents, or do you think that you were just born that way, or what do you think formulated that, Brad?
Yeah, I guess it's the again, it's knowing the path can be taken. So I guess early days in your career and probably your first, or for me anyway, the first 6 to 12 months was I need to absorb as much information I possibly can about how to start a business, what business is. I didn't do a degree. I didn't really learn about business in school. Economics was boring as shit. So I learned about fiscal responsibility. I'm like, all these buzzwords went over my head. And I'm like, oh, this isn't really economically what I want to learn about. And not useful. So I was a sponge for the first 6 to 12 months, really learning off other business people, but learning then off lawyers, accountants, stockbrokers, business people, and just going there with 1,000 different questions about, okay, well, how do you do this? And how do you do that? And then how do you start a business? Well, you got to write a business plan. Okay, well, then what do I do then? I don't have any money. You got to raise money. How do you raise money? Or you go to angels and ask them for it. How do you do that? Oh, you got to start a constitution, a shareholders agreement. What does that look like? If you ask enough questions, you'll find the answers. Now, most people don't, not so most people, the average person probably won't get to those questions in the speed that they need to get them. They'll get to a certain level of education, and then they'll go, all right, I've got enough now, I can get going. Or I'll listen to a podcast and, Brad said, you just got to go out and speak to 50 angels and you'll get the cash. It's like, I mean, yes, true. But there's a whole lot of backstory to that. And there's a whole bunch of stuff you have to do pre those meetings, to be able to even get the cash. So I look back at my career and think it was probably 11 years of kind of slog and then 1 year of really good growth and then the exit. So, I help people because of how much failure I've had. And failure is the best education you can possibly have. It's the shittest, the worst, waking up with that gut feeling every morning of like the world's going to fucking end. And you're like, half of it is then becomes shameful because then as an intelligent person, you're thinking, I'm a first world person. I know I can go back home. But so why do I feel this way? And again, back to your point around what drove me is the fear of failing. I had to, if I was going to get into something, I think I got into business because I found it interesting.
Mm. Were you into business at all during school? Like, were you
Look,
side hustles?
no, like funnily enough though, I managed to steal back some memorabilia from my mum. Don't tell her that. About 2 weeks ago, and she's had it for like 20 years, right? And I said, my kids actually want to see it. Not a lot of it, but I wouldn't mind seeing a few photos of dad in the paper. Not that they would know what a newspaper is, but I got it, and I remember there's a document in there that I remember filling out at school. So I filled out this form. So I went to a fairly wealthy private school, and my dad's like, it's all about who you know, not what you know, and there's an element of truth to that. There's a bit of both, but you've got to be well connected. And I remember it was literally I'd gone around the whole grade, like 175 guys, and literally had a questionnaire for them.
What?
What's your name? What does your dad do? What are you looking to do after school? Basically trying to work out.
And this is at what age?
16. I was trying to work out what they were going to do because I wanted to know what networks I needed post-school. Now, what was really funny about that exercise was the amount of people that would not tell me what their dad did.
Oh,
Yeah,
why do you think
like,
that
I
is?
can't tell you what my dad does.
Hmm.
Not even like I'm embarrassed because I don't know. They were taught. Like, do not talk about our business at school. Do not talk about the family business. Do not talk about my job. Do not talk about anything that you see here. So that's kind of what I got from it, which is really quite funny. But I found maybe that was probably the earliest sign, I guess, if you like, of me thinking at least a bit about business.
Did you ever call anybody off the list?
No, never. I don't think I put it in the bin. I didn't put it in the bin. I put it at home. My mom took it. Maybe she used it. I don't know. Pretty good list. So I should look at it now and see what they're all doing. But it's kind of like LinkedIn, right? It was like LinkedIn of whatever, 2002. The only earliest memory I have of technology was sitting in IT, trying to learn I think it was like Python or something, and just, it was so fucking boring. And I'm just like, I can't do this. So I quit. I went and did legal studies instead. But I asked my teacher, I'm like, it'd be really cool if you could get a device that would exchange languages. Like I'd talk into it in one language and it would talk to someone else in their language and back and forth just using a device. And like most, pre-internet people that didn't think the internet was going to take off, he's like, it can't be done. It'll never be done, ever. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's Google Translate now. Obviously, seeing the future is one thing. But even like 8 years ago, where technology had moved a hell of a lot, when we first started Citrus out, I said, I'd love to do this startup next, albeit I don't really never do a startup again. But it was around mental health for men. It was around things, I wanted to create an AI chatbot for, as a therapist for a man, basically. Men generally struggle to want to reach out and talk to people. Women do a much better job of that and they're much better communicators, typically. Men don't really wanna talk about their issues, and I kind of the problem I was trying to solve is that why doesn't a man wanna talk about their issues? And largely it's because as humans, we can't help but read the body language of the person sitting in front of us, right? So apart from divulging things that we perhaps don't want anyone else to repeat ever, and, the therapy world is fraught with people just talking shit about each other all the time, you don't wanna be judged. And so immediately, a lot of men carry around with them a lot of baggage, a lot of sin, a lot of guilt, a lot of things that they regret, and they don't want to talk about them, so they just bottle them all up. And I kind of figured, I always imagined someone just walking to work back when we didn't have AirPods, they're like just talking to this voice, and it would be intelligent, but not sentient. So it wouldn't be human, and they would know that. But that's also part of the benefit is that they're not being judged by any predisposition of the person that's sitting in front of them. And it's been further proven by other people that I know who wouldn't have traditionally otherwise gone to therapy, have started talking to, guess what? ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT goes only so far as it has any intelligent conversation. It's mostly trained on like mathematics, computer science, history, arts and technology basis. There's like a few things it's really well trained in. But it's a very, very intelligent conversation. So if you're intelligent as a person, then it's pretty cool to have a conversation with it, but you got to ask it the right questions. So anyway, I started thinking about that. And then you fast forward to today and you think, well, it isn't quite there, but there's the LLMs there that I could probably do that. And so, yeah, coming back to your original question, and I think there are always like signs to show that you have a creative gene. I like to solve problems. That's what I love doing. Give me a problem to solve, I'll love to solve it. That's actually my endorphin. And so as you get older, you start to understand yourself, and you realize that there's 4 different types of feel-good factors. I won't know them all. There's like serotonin, endorphins. There's 2 others I forgot there. It basically shows you, okay, where do you get your happiness from? And mine sat well and truly, there was 16 things you could get happiness from. Like there's one that was basically all about affection, cuddles, hugs, sort of physical touch, intimacy. Then there was like spoken word, kind of like affirmation, love, all that sort of stuff. And then there was uh, dopamine, which was my drug. And my wife's like, okay, you need to have a look at this chart and see where you fit. Out of 16, there was like 1, like productivity. But it was great because, I'd always wonder why some days are better than others. And even if I didn't have a great day, if I felt like it was somewhat productive, I'd feel better. And that became your love language. And so as early entrepreneurs, if you're young in your career, you should start to understand what makes you as a person. So understand what Enneagram you are. Understand what love languages you have. Understand your partner's love languages quickly. And even understand where you get your hits from, because it may not be productivity. It may be that it's emotional, or it may be that it's exercise. Like once you know, at least then you know how to fuel the tank basically to keep going.
And this is something, by the sounds of it, that you've gone deep on in the past 2 years ever since exiting Citrus, or is this something that you?
And I go about a page deep.
Okay.
I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then the rest I kind of just go, that's the thing with taking everything with a pinch of salt, right? Is you take 1% from 100 things and you're 10% better off. So, yeah, I mean, I read it anecdotally and I go, does that make sense? It's like anything I look at in life. What's the ulterior motive behind this? Is there any? I don't think so. It's just a graph of personality types. Who's to gain monetary-wise from this? No one? Okay, well, then I can trust it a little bit more. So, not that I'm teaching my kids to be cynical, but I'm like, if you hear anything in the world of any sort, whether it's a natural disaster or like some plot somewhere or some war started, it's like, are there any beneficiaries? Yes, normally arms dealers. Not that I want to teach them to be too cynical just yet, so they got plenty of time to become cynical, but there's a fine line between cynicism and being practical and understanding the world that we live in.
And so walk me through what possibly took you down the direction of software as a service, and then specifically into you went into NOQ.
Yeah, so no Q. Yep, that's okay. Better than knock, which is what I got knocked down by a guy. It was an awards night. At least know your awardees. Like, I mean, for fuck's sake. Wow. And the idea was that we just skipped Qs. That was the premise of the product. No Q, no Qs. Anyway, not that it bugs me. But yeah, so no Q was a brainchild of I love tech, like, actually. So I had the first iPhone 2. So ordered it from the US, jailbroke it, because it was cool. I like gadgets, I guess, if you think of it that way. And the iPhone was like the coolest shit ever, like, at the time. Like, iPhone 2 was really cool. And now it's just like, everyone's got one, and it's no different to what it was 15 years ago, really. Apart from a camera that's tracking you every 5 seconds, and your battery's burning hot in your pocket because it's tracking every single thing about you biometrically, including your search history, which I don't know. As long as it's encrypted, it's fine. But no, I had an interest in tech, and then I literally sat there with the iPhone 2 in a movie theater and thought, as an athlete, I could only eat, like, Nando's and stuff like that. It was really healthy. I'm like, "Oh, it's like 25 minutes if I go out there, and wouldn't it be really cool? I reckon this thing could talk to them, and I could order something and not have to wait 25 minutes for my order." Now, online ordering had been around for at least 5 years prior to that with Menulog. They'd been around online in the web format, but no one was really mobile. And so from that point onwards, I had 2 ideas. Um, I went to So I had an idea. I thought, "That's really cool." I sat on it for 6 months until my injury kinda came, and then I'm like, "Actually, I'm gonna pick this idea up now because football's kinda dead, and I've got a year left on my contract, so I'm gonna use that year while I'm being paid." Another lesson for founders: don't start when you're fucking broke, 'cause it immediately puts pressure on you, unnecessary pressure. Start your side hustle when you're in your corporate job or whatever you're getting paid, and then when you're ready to take the leap, then take the leap. But don't take the leap till you got funding. Um So basically, I went there with two businesses. One which was effectively pre-ordering and paying for taxis. You could say it was Uber-esque. Um, and then the other one was food. And at that point, I learned my first business lesson, which was total addressable market. I didn't learn it in that phrase or any particular reason. Everyone got excited about the taxi thing. It's like, oh, that's a really cool idea. Imagine, yeah, that would be wicked. Location based and I leaned towards the fast food and coffee industry because I thought, well, there's 4 taxi companies in Australia, and it's like the mafia, and if they all say no, the business is dead. Uber was different. It was a very different model, clever model, all about getting the independence under the limo license, which was a nice ruse because to get a taxi license is just, incredibly difficult. So that was very, very, very well done by Travis Kalanick over there. But again, that market he was exposed to that market, and so the idea would have come to him very, very differently than it would have come to me. Either way, you're trying to solve a problem with this new piece of tech that you've got in front of you. So all I was doing was joining problems with tech enablement at the time. So I thought, well, I'm going to get a no queue because there are 100,000 fast food restaurants in Australia, coffee shops, and so if one says no, I'll get the next one. It's a law of averages, right? The numbers game. So that started and raised money. Won't bore you with the whole story because it is interesting, but it's not as interesting as where you get to kind of at the end of the story.
But it must have been quite profound going for your first cap raise, right?
Yeah, it was really disheartening.
Okay.
Man, kind of, rainbows and unicorns and all that sort of shit. No. When you ask people to part with their hard-earned, the good thing about being part of a football club is you get access to some very wealthy people who like you because you play football. So you spend, 2 hours talking to them about football, and then you spend 20 minutes just going, I've got this idea, have a look at that, and let me talk to you about it. And then what they'll generally do if they're an angel investor is they'll, like Rob Gerard did to me, which is really funny. I thought, I'm not going to be on that pile. Step back a second. So I went into his office. This is a guy that owns Clipsal. Right. So, he's a big deal. He's a lovely guy. Really entrepreneurial, backs a lot of things. And he goes, all right, you got an idea? Okay, cool. There's a pile behind me. It's like, there's a pile like that. He goes, that's all the ones I've lost money on. And that's all the ones that's made me money. And even that one's in a lawsuit right now. I'm like, okay, I want to be on the third pile. I wasn't making money. Anyway, he said, look, if you can, I was a reasonable sales guy. Right? I was fairly charismatic. I knew how to talk to someone. I knew how to make them like me, which was the first point about business. Is you're selling to a person, not a company. Always selling to a person. And he goes, right, if you raise 900, I'll give you the last 100. I was like, all right, harsh but fair. At that point, to a founder, I was at 0. So I was like, everyone probably says that, everyone's in for the last 100, and so I probably did 50, 60 meetings, which is a lot of meetings, right? It's not to be brushed off. 10, 20, 30 meetings with angels. VCs weren't really a thing back in 2010. It was more like pockets of angels that sort of formed as syndicates, but they like to think of themselves as VCs. And it was kind of like sitting in front of guys with magnifying glasses burning ants. It was really a way for them to come after work and blow off steam and tear your business to shreds because they're probably unhappy with their life. And I found those meetings very counterproductive. Yes, there were some good questions in some of the meetings, and you have to hold your tongue and answer them with, good logic. But the reason you do 50 or 60 typically with your first startup is because you're actually hearing what the market says about your product. Can you convince who's probably going to be a customer of yours that your product's good? And then I learned very early on that I sold a great solution, and I sold it because I was good at selling. What I realized with Citrus, my second startup, is that I sold a really good problem. And I fell in love with the problem, and I solved it in a different way than I thought I was originally going to solve it, because I went to the customer, started talking about the problem with them, and then devised the solution based upon the best way to solve the problem.
So with round 2, you started with the problem first and the customer specifically, rather than what did Brad think was best, and hope that that was going to work out.
Pretty much. And that, unfortunately, is how a lot of founders start. And to me, I was like, I hate skipping queues. I hate lining up. It's like, most people actually like lining up because it's a sense of conformity. Like, it's part of their structure in their day. That's what they do.
Or wouldn't pay for it.
Yeah. I love Michael McIntyre as a comedian, if you know him. Like, he talks about people just doing routine. And he's right. Like, they go to the coffee shop and they just stand there for no other reason that it makes them feel part of society. They don't like to be the guy waiting over there on his own who skips the queue. Like, he saved 20 minutes, but he's out there on a lonely limb. So I learned a fair bit about human psychology. You can train habits though. Like, you can definitely train behaviors and make it normal. But we realized that being a B2B and a B2C business was not going to work. So I have to go out all day, every day, selling to businesses, trying to sign them up to the platform. We were like Uber Eats, but like 2010, right? Without the delivery component. We built this wicked app on a 3GS. It was all tokenized credit cards. So you put a PIN number in it, make a payment. So we'd basically invented the notion of micropayments, as you know today. So we were well ahead of PayPal, well ahead of everyone. And so part of that was that we were in the candy store. We were getting pulled from different industries to say, oh, why don't you just become a payment system to sit on the back of everyone else? I'm like, shit, that's pretty good. Like, what we've created here is unheard of. Again, you talk about luck. Well, I talk about luck. The company, the payment gateway, had just created that system about a month before we launched. Then we had a bank who was a friend of the club who's like, oh, I'll help you do the merchant system, because the payment system is like really complicated. Everyone thinks it's simple. It's simpler now, but it is really complicated. So we weren't just a pre-order and select your menu items and select which cappuccino you want, all that sort of stuff. We were a payment system. So we were dispersing money to almost 1,000 different businesses in real time. And that was actually probably more beneficial. We didn't go down that path though. What we did is we ended up white labeling our solution. So the very first thing I did when I finished football is I went to Silicon Valley and I sat there in a bunch of keynotes just to get the vibe of what an entrepreneur does. And I sat through various keynotes. One of them was like a pitch contest. And I'm like, fuck, these guys are better than me. Like, they're so polished. These kids are like probably my age, but 20, 21, 22, like Stanford, Harvard graduates, all that stuff. But they're all selling bullshit. It's all smoke. And like, there's only so much smoke you can sell. But they sell a lot of it over there. So I learned a little bit about that and about pitching, and then I listened to, I shouldn't forget his name because he's a very famous guy, Larry, the guy that started Oracle and then was the first investor into Google.
Ellison.
Yeah. He was giving a keynote, and then the guy who started Farmville was giving a keynote as well. And what I learned very early on in my career is that listening to other intelligent people talk actually sends off a whole bunch of creative thoughts in your brain. Can't remember anything they said, but I thought of the best business ideas. So another point for founders, if you want to learn, don't go listen to someone, well, obviously go listen to someone who's in your field, but occasionally go listen to an expert in a different field where you can just zone out and think of your own creative thoughts. Maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Maybe it's just a me thing. I don't know. But I used to find that when I got up in the morning at 5 o'clock and did a red-eye flight to Sydney, I'd be firing on all cylinders. And then I'm like, why? It's because you're out of your normal routine. You're in a new surrounding. For some reason, you're more creative. I don't know why, but every time I got on a plane, I'd come up with these great ideas. So I can't work out why that is. Maybe it's because when you're in your normal routine, you don't think outside the box. You're just in your routine. You don't think. So anyway, so we pivoted. We started white labeling it because no one wanted our brand. Like no one really wants Uber on their brand. McDonald's would much prefer to white label Uber if they could, but they can't because they got so much critical mass now. But we got a few chains on. We got a few pizza chains, Noodle Box. We kind of got like the smaller sort of end of the chains. And then we won a big deal with Westfield. We sold some bullshit along the way. Like they wanted to build the world's first responsive website with e-commerce in it. And nowadays you look back and you go, well, that's pretty easy. But most websites were static. They weren't responsive to native and mobile. They weren't built in like Ember and like what was Ember back then. It's probably different React now. But the first rule the first thing I learned was just no more than the other people in the room. So we got contracted to do their app because we built a good app. And they're like, all right, well, we'll use the framework of what they got and we'll sort of white label it and just redesign and all that sort of stuff because Xcode's not that hard to redo. And I remember sitting in a room with all the Westfield people, labs guys, and the guy that they'd got to contract in to build this website, he looked really nervous in this meeting. And they're like, okay, so how long is it going to take you and how much money is it going to cost and how are you going to do it? And he didn't really have any good answers. And I'm like, I'm going to shoot this guy. And so I said, oh, we've done it. Yeah, we know that. We know how that works. Yeah. And so I used a bunch of buzzwords and this. I was like, yeah, you just do this. And like it connects to our back end of our API. And I could talk enough to make you think I was a technical guy. So I used to go to a lot of meetings and people would think I was the CTO as well. And instantly it was like bullet back of the head. We got the gig. Went back to Australia. I said, boys, girls, we've got the Westfield gig. And they're like, they've got the manuals out. How do you build in this code? Like, how do we do it? So they rebuilt it like 4 times. And eventually we got there. But sometimes you got to throw yourself into the deep end and then work out how to swim. Now, let's not do the Theranos model where we tell everyone that we can cure diabetes and actually sell a bunch of lies. But you should always try and, stretch for reasonable goals that you can definitely deliver on. But that taught me about not boardroom, but room dynamics, about when there's an opportunity, you have to try and seize it. And I try and teach my kids this. It's that life's not going to give you anything. You have to take it. And athletes learn this as well because you're often competing with someone else in your team for a particular spot. No one's going to give you that spot. You have to take it. And so there's a very, very different mindset between someone working hard and trying to go for something versus someone that goes, all right, in order for me to succeed, I have to take this from someone else. It's a very different mindset. It's a combative mindset. It's like, if for me to win this boxing match, I have to knock the other guy out. Whereas in business or other sports, you don't really think like that. If I just play my part, or I just do this, then I'll be successful. So that was the start of NoQ. And then we pivoted into grocery because it was out of pure luck, again, as most things are.
Delivering groceries?
No, like we were very much like Menulog, Uber. Oh, Uber does everything now, but we were anyone that had sort of 100 items or less because they had to manually enter them into our system. Like running like a point of sale and our system at the same time. Mm-hmm. And then, so it's really like fast food, pizza, coffee, all that sort of stuff. A friend of a friend was in grocery, and they were paying like $100,000 to have a website made up. And again, it was a Westfield moment. It's like, we can do that. $100,000. These guys are paying us like $500. So fuck, we're in grocery now. So I'm back to the team and said, we're our grocers from now on. And and then the shit show started. And I realized that there wasn't much competition in the space because it isn't about building a website. It's about that ugly point of sale system that they've got running their systems inside the tills. So things have changed now, but back in the day, you were only allowed 24 characters for your product. So Coca-Cola would be given a bunch of barcodes. Here's a barcode for all of your products, right? Now you got to provide a description for that product using 24 characters only because that's how much will fit on a receipt. And no one gives a shit that it's C/CLA because people go pick up the product and they put it and they scan it. As long as they scan know the price and they know what stock level it is and know the code, all as well. So you try taking 35,000 products out of a point of sale and none of them make sense. You've literally got to walk through the store and try and pick up, like we literally had teams of people walking through stores, picking up barcodes and matching them against. And then we figured out there's a system to this. 931 is Coca-Cola Amatil. 000 is some other kind of, so we became like a data system, basically. Long story short. Anyway, we just solved the problem that was in front of us. Then we realized that it was all about logistics and fulfillment. So even to this day, if you want to become a grocer that's selling shopping online, it's going to cost you about $25 per order, regardless of how much you sell. So they run on penny margins, maybe 2% operating profit. So even on a $100 order, $200 order, they're making $4 or $5 per order, give or take. Most of their money comes from advertising. So at the time, we were selling something that was very, very difficult. But, with enough charisma and enough, you need this and enough fear, like Amazon's coming for you, Instacart's coming for you, Walmart's coming for you. It's like, we better do it. And it's like, fear is a very, very strong motivator when it comes to business decisions. In fact, the only one. And so we went to the US because we knew we couldn't get Woolies and Coles. The IGAs were too small. E-commerce just wasn't big enough here. Me and my co-founder, or he's my co-founder of Citrus, he was my sort of like my CMO at NoQ. Again, it was a bit like you asked me, how did I start? I just asked a bunch of dumb questions, right? But asked enough of them.
That you landed at the problem.
Correct. Yeah. So in this story, we wanted to go to the US. Okay, how does one go to the US? Do you just turn up on a plane and we're in the US? Like, okay, well, let's just type in groceries, America. Google, National Grocers Association. Okay, we'll call these guys. All right, we got a e-commerce product for grocery. What do you reckon we should do? Well, there's an event coming up in 4 weeks in Vegas. It's a national event. It's a long shot. Most people just sell like meat and fridges and stuff like that. But this is where all the people go. Okay, cool. And you should speak to these guys because they're like IT guys. I spoke to the IT guys, like speaking to the IT crowd, another TV show. Not the right guys. We're like, okay, we're going to come and we're going to exhibit at the show. We're going to put a stand there. And literally, it was as if we dropped an Apple store in a flea market. Like, I was like, we need to stand out. So we bought a 65-inch TV, which in 2014 was pretty big. Massive light show, white floors. Everyone else was on the brown carpet with curtains, selling scales and trolleys and meat, literally. And like, it's just these fucking random Aussies in the corner of the room. And some people were just like shaking their heads like, who the fuck are these guys? But most people wrote us off. But there was a couple of guys that didn't. But like, this is actually very, very interesting. We believed there was a future in this. And then we signed a deal with a big wholesaler over there that got us into all these different places. And I convinced my board, we got to go to the US, got to go to the US, got to go to the US. They did not want to go to the US.
In hindsight, was the right decision?
Yeah, business still operates today. It just operates without me. But look, every founder has their expiry date if they don't manage their board well and their shareholders well. And I ran them into a lot of shareholder and board fatigue. We raised a lot. We changed direction a lot. Now, hindsight would have been, I would have started in grocery. I would have started in like that particular industry, right? But it's fucking hindsight. So you've only got so many pivots before you're dead. And I'd reached my amount of pivots. So I went to the US and, you know, they hired a US team because obviously they needed people with gray hair and all that sort of stuff to run the company because a 27-year-old can't run a business. So they got an ex-General Motors consultant from Deloitte to run a tech startup. Never been part of a startup, never been in tech, never been in retail. So perfect fit. Anyway, his only mission was to get rid of me, and he succeeded. Took him 6 months, but held him for the long run. But when people say, what was your best achievement for your first business, apart from learning a lot, was I'm surprised I lasted 6 years because from the minute get-go, again, talking about cap tables, and we could spend forever talking about cap tables and equity and all that sort of stuff, but from the minute go, I only had 30% of the business from the very first day.
It's quite low.
Low, yeah.
Yeah.
But I had no credibility. I was asking other people to put $1 million into an idea, which is a piece of paper, into a guy that had no business experience as an ex-footballer on a whim. So people need to think back from the investor side too. The chances of you making it are close to zero. Even if you're good, they're close to zero because there's so many other external factors out there. You know, as a second, third time founder, it's still pretty low. So, you know, appreciate the money that does come your way. And even with Citrus, you know, we gave away less. We still maintained majority control because that was a big learning from the first business. But, you know, you walk away, I can tell you like 10% of $1 billion is a lot more than 100% of sweet fuck all. So,
So by the time you wrapped up with NoQ, how big was that team?
we were probably 50 people. Yeah. So we were growing. We were probably doing about 4 or 5 mil in revenue. But, you know, management came in, slowed everything down. And then, you know, I believe in fate and path. And, you know, I believe that God has a path for all of us. And it was serendipitous that the day I got fired, September 1st, 5 years later, I sold my business on September 1st. And on that day, I didn't smile. A lot of money hit my bank account, but it was just a weird moment. Just, I don't know, just.
Why is that?
Well, I think it was just a whole bunch of emotions all at once. Bit of relief, but pressure that now there's new buyers. So now I've got to make them happy. And so there was never really a downtime. People think that you have this like bubble burst. You don't, because business is never that straightforward. When you suffer from paranoia like I do, and they start to say, there's a saying now going around, only the paranoid succeed. And there's a huge element of truth to that. Is that you just shift your focus from being paranoid about not failing for your current investors to, I don't want this to look like a bad purchase for these guys. So I got to, you know, I was chasing affirmation is what I was doing constantly. And so that's why things never really changed. But anyway, what did put a smile on my face that day is the CEO and the chairman of my old company got sacked. So I was like, isn't that serendipitous that it happened on exactly the same day, 5 years apart? That still brings a smile now. So not to say I was right. I mean, I didn't care. Like I learned so much from that business, and
Well, you must have. I mean, growing a team to 50 people or, you know,
yeah,
5-ish
and the
million
hard way
is
too.
huge.
And that laid the platform for Citrus because we solved a much bigger problem. Okay, we realized, why are you not buying our e-commerce solution? Because it costs a shit ton of money to run. Okay, how do we not make it cost that much money to run? We need to put advertisements on this. We need to get the brands to pay or to subsidize the cost of running these e-com businesses.
And when did the thought hit you? So you wrapped up September 1 with NoQ. How much longer? What did you do first of
Oh,
all?
look,
and
I
then-
mean, the idea of subsidies was always kind of there. Like you always know, all right, execution's another thing though. You know, I started to really think about it as I wanted to build the Google AdWords of online retail. So simple, anyone can create an ad, even though Google AdWords are really fucking hard to create. So I shouldn't use them as an example, but the most convoluted system in the world designed for resellers. That's why it's designed that way. But I wanted it to be so simple that within 3 clicks, you could select a product, select search terms, select how much you're prepared to bid, and launch and send to a retailer site. And we literally made it that simple. And that's why we took the market.
I've used it before.
Oh, cool. What year? Which company? Which hack did we put in?
3 years ago?
Okay, so that would have been all right back then.
It was a good solution.
Yeah. Well, it should have been intuitive, right? It should have been easy to use.
Frankly, coming from a media background, and I think you'll hear that, like my background is advertising, marketing, specifically Google or Facebook or whatever. But coming from those mediums to citrus, a lot of us, especially in my team, were quite confused because it was so simple
Yeah.
that we were
Thought something was wrong with it.
we were looking for the complexity the whole time. And actually, hold on, how does the what's missing here? This is a little too easy. Just putting your numbers, hit your bid, and click go. Seemed quite interesting.
It did, and to be honest, without digressing too much, it intimidated agencies because they're like, the brand could probably do this.
But the return was phenomenal.
Huge.
Yeah.
Point of purchase.
Yeah, sure.
Like 5-to-1 ratio. Easy. And it's direct. Like you click, you buy, you know exactly how many sales you made from that particular dollar. Facebook, Google, it's sort of like a inferred uplift. Right. So we knew that was the problem. We knew that retailers were not technical.
Just going back, sorry, this was how long after you wrapped up with NoQ?
About 4 or 5 months.
Okay. So this
Ideas started to generate. I mean, not so much idea, but you go from an idea to, okay, how do I make this a product? How do I start solving the problem? And the difference between idea, like, okay, I need to monetize the site, whacking a banner on it or putting a sponsored product in is a very quick idea. And there were other competitors out there doing it at the time. But none of them were doing it well. None of them were tech solutions. Just like, all right, what if we just whack some JavaScript at the top of the page and we just insert, like, literally send them the whole payload? And that was their competition at the time. And we basically said, well, no, retailers love control. They hate third-party things coming on their sites. And, for example, if you went to our competitor, I won't name them, but if you went to our competitor many, many years ago and you started typing in things like biscuits, you get dog biscuits. Or you typed in bananas and occasionally you get banana-flavored condoms. So the relevance was not quite there. And the system just wasn't very, very well built. So we took all of the things that we knew about retail, which was that they're control freaks, want to own their data, want to control everything. And then we built a system that enabled the brands, so Coke, Pepsi, and all the other 500 tail brands. So one of the things they suffered from is they could only really monetize the top 10 because they all work with merch teams. They've only probably got 5 or 6 sales guys. And those salespeople are responsible for writing all the advertising for the top brands. And they don't have time to talk to Remedy Kombucha, for example. They're too small. Like I only got time for like Coke, Pepsi shops. You'd be surprised how many brands didn't even get in the doors of Woolies and Coles because they were so small. You're talking about $100 million business here, not a $50 business with one product. These are actual legitimate businesses. So we solved a number of problems, but the biggest problem we solved was that we just made it easy. So the API was like Stripe. If you know Stripe, Stripe was the benchmark. Literally copied Stripe. I said it needs to look like Stripe. I wanted to look just like that because they nailed it because the UI was good. It wasn't like going to an API documentation set and being like, read through fucking 10 pages just to get to like the first command. It's like we drew diagrams and pictures and my developers like, what are you doing diagrams for? And like pretty pictures and animations. I'm like, because people need to understand how this is going to work in a visual way.
And then it'll increase the adoption.
Correct. And that's exactly what we did. We knocked the market out 2.5 years. Competitors started to then catch up like, oh shit. This company is actually showing results in real time and being really open. Yeah.
When you said that, you mean, for example, certain products sell significantly faster and better through one retailer than maybe does with another. And by having citrus on both, I can compare quite quickly which retailer is selling better.
There's
my
an old
same
saying in
product.
advertising, you'd know this. It's like, if I spend $1 million with a retailer, I know that half of it works, but I don't know where the other half is gone. I don't know which half worked though. That was really the problem that we were solving for the brand that the retailers were nervous about. It's a case of, okay, well, if a click only costs $1 and they can get a 4-time return, then we can really only charge them $1. Can't charge them 4.
And it gives them visibility into, I think with citrus specifically, the clicks as well, right?
Everything.
So they can also
Impressions,
see
clicks,
volume.
They can see
Yeah.
how many times they appeared on each search term, how many sales they got, how many clicks to conversions. We gave like a lot more data after that, but that was kind of the premise of it all. But what it did is it put a microscope very, very quickly on performance, how this site actually performed. And merchandising teams couldn't then just be like, oh, give us $1 million and we'll give you a couple of months on the front page. Those days were gone. But the ones that embraced it and the ones that sold the results made way more money.
And so what was who was your big first retailer that joined?
Dan
Industry.
Murphy's was our first retailer.
And how did this conversation happen?
Again, through networking. So the one thing I did with Citrus really well was worked people. So I knew the retail was really hard to break into. And whilst we'd been in no queue, we were dealing with coffee shop owners. We weren't dealing in the corporate retail world. And so I knew I had to get to know that world. So I went out and made friends with lots of different people and tried to not grease the wheels, but I had a ESOP plan just for referrals. So I had like 10% of the business just set aside for people that could introduce me to retailers. And there were some people that made like $5 million off introducing me to like 3 retailers. And they were happy as pig and shit, obviously, when we sold, but they still put their nuts on the line to introduce us. And when you realize that about retail and any industry, it's often about if you can infiltrate, I know that's like, co-op kind of covert word, but it literally is like that in the US. If you can infiltrate the right people, they will open the doors for you. Because there are millions of products out there. You can have the best product in the world, but there's 10 competitors out there doing what you do. And if they don't do what you do, they say they do what you do. And you can't argue with that because salespeople are that's the way they operate. But if you have someone that knows the retailer, went to Ivy League school with them, plays soccer with them on a weekend, their kids are friends, like once you get into that network, the doors start to open. And the hard part is understanding that that's the way the business is done. And the hard part is actually infiltrating that network. Got to be something in it for them. Got to be, can't tarnish their brand. These guys have spent 30 years building a reputation in the market of being who they are. They've probably worked from various different tech companies, or maybe they've worked for retailers. And so any industry, you have to learn who are the heavy hitters in the industry, who are the people that are actually shake and move this industry. And for me, it's people I already knew, but I'd never really contacted. And then there was obviously my direct competitors. So luckily for me, again, a bit of luck, our direct competitor had just sold to a big French company 3 years before. So all their non-competes had just ran out. It was like, great, hire the whole team. Not the whole team, but I hired like 3 or 4 of them. And then when we were coming up to acquisition and we wanted to win, it's really hard to go into a business. I mean, I can talk about numbers from years ago because they're probably doing way more than that now. It's really hard to go into a business who's doing maybe like $200 million in sponsored products a year and go, change to our system. Because it's a $200 million risk with a startup with a slightly better platform. And so I thought, we're not going to win this on our merits alone. So I spoke to my friends who knew the other companies there, and I said, how does that operation work? Oh, it's run by about like 6 people. And they're really influential and outsource a whole lot. Okay. So I hired all 6 people, just bled them out. And, it's ruthless. It's like, you go, oh, that's fucking mercenary. That's bad of you. It's like, no. All I did was I got myself to the table. They worked once again except they worked with our badge on. So, so sometimes in business, you have to do deals like that where like, I'm not going to get in here. So I've got to think outside the box. So I'm going to go hire the whole team. They're all going to panic and they're going to want to talk.
So maybe having to make sort of unpopular decisions.
It's also like, it's not even unpopular. It's more like, for me as a person, you go, oh man, is that even ethical? Like, I don't feel really good about making that decision, but this is just the jungle you operate in. You don't go into the Amazon jungle, like the rainforest or the jungle thinking, I hope the lions are nice to me today. Like, it's like, better fucking get a spear real quick and make friends with some other big lions, otherwise I'm going to die. And that's probably the harsh thing that a lot of startup founders haven't probably grasped in their young careers, is that business is mercenary. So you either become a mercenary or you get out.
War.
It is war.
And then moving forward, so now, Citrus had quite a bit of success, quite a lot of success. What led you to deciding to exit? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I mean, I was on my hands and knees by the time we got to the exit. I barely made it to the finish line. I remember having a chat with my broker, and when we signed the term sheet March 1, and it was closing July 1, and obviously it takes me for money to move around and sort of stuff, but they couldn't go back after July 1. And I said to him on March 1, I'm like, I'm not going to make it to July. Like, I'm so fucked. Like, I cannot get out of bed. I can't make it to any more meetings. My heart's beating out of his chest. I'm on more medication than I care to talk about. I can't do it. And he's like, look, just get to July, then you can quit. And I don't know. I just became good at pushing through to the point where you end up destroying your body. So, yeah, I think for me, I saw a couple of things. And it took a few years to happen, but Amazon has created a competitor now to us, like they did with web services and every other thing that they do well. I always knew that was going to happen. Didn't know when. I knew that COVID provided a lot of supply chain issues, so I knew they were coming and headwinds were coming. But I also knew the main thing about startups, which is when the founder dies or the founding team dies, the business dies. And I was the risk. So if I'd have gone down or I couldn't go to work anymore, the business would have taken a huge backward step. And I couldn't afford for that to happen. And, when you're offered 200 million, which changes everyone's lives, my investors got a 45-time return on their money. Yeah, they wanted a $1 billion company, but it just wasn't a $1 billion company. It never would have been. I even look at it now and said, all right, if we won every client we could we have got to $1 billion? No. Because what would happen is we would have become commoditized. Our margins would get pushed down thinner and thinner and thinner. And there's a thing that I learn about exits, and I'm no expert in exits, but I pick things up fairly quickly. You ask any tech startup, all right, who's going to buy you? Google, Facebook, Instagram, all common names, right? But Google buys businesses for big sums of money. Same as Oracle, same as Adobe. But they buy mature 10, 12-year-old businesses that are doing $1 billion in revenue. And they're quite happy to pay $10 billion for it because it's mature. They don't have to worry about it. So we approached Google. They loved our business. They tried to get into our space many, many times, which is another story for another day. All heart-wrenching and thinking the world was over when they did. But, the guy basically said to me, he said, look, you're too small.
So is it fear of founder exposure, founder risk?
Which part?
Just a company like Google, is it a fear?
No,
of being exposed
it's
to
a fear of they do nearly 100 billion in revenue, and we did 40, and the amount of effort they would have had to have put into our business to maintain it wasn't worth their focus. And so what they want is businesses that they don't have to focus on, businesses that are just running. The founders probably aren't even there anymore. There's like self-sustaining, already big businesses that are accretive or they can sort of cross-pollinate with. Occasionally, they used to buy lots of startups in the retail sector, and then they shut them all down. I think it was more just trying to learn about IP, or they would buy the founders, or they would buy the engineers, and there's lots of different reasons for acquisitions in Silicon Valley. Most of them are teams. They buy the team. Like Instagram was bought for the team initially, obviously great product, but would have been bought 4 years earlier for $100 million had we have been in Silicon Valley, because they wanted to acqui-hire. They wanted to hire us, but buy the business. But like Australia, as will be in the fucking African desert. It's like, where is that again? No, I'm not interested. So, so for me, it was all about timing. There was a few things I saw. The market was good at the time. Cash was still cheap. I think we got a fair valuation. We did double the revenue the next year, but I can guarantee you our valuation wouldn't have moved. So you'd have gone from 6x to 3 because the market wasn't paying those numbers anymore. A year later, it was a fucking train wreck. So, and now we're at a point where It's flooded with competitors. It's a race to the bottom, and Amazon's in the game too now. So, I kind of look back and go, that's probably a smart move in the end.
And is there advice, Brad, that you'd give back to your past self? Maybe not someone that's necessarily right in the midst of an exit of a $100 million deal, but a founder or an entrepreneur that's feeling extremely burnt out.
The only advice I would give them is it's not advice. It's more just reassurance, because a lot of people that burn themselves out obviously feel very guilty. And there's a lot of mixed messages out there to say, have balance in your life. And yeah, sure. If you can do it and be the only person ever to do it, be that person. But if you want something that is very hard to get, and you want something that is life changing and that can set you up for life or is your biggest dream, expect to pay the biggest price for it. So when you suffer with a smile, knowing that this is what it takes to be successful. And don't listen to all the bullshit out there that tells you you can have it all. Like, you can, just not all at the same time. Like, you can have peace in your life, but it's not at the same time as driving a startup. If you're driving a startup, you're in that driver's seat and it's fucking awful, horrendous. What you got to do is go, am I committed to 12 years of being beaten to shit on the hope that I eventually get there? And if you're okay with that, that's the mindset you should have. So it's not advice, but it's more just reassurance that no one does it easy. And, there's an old saying that anything worth having is, really, really hard to achieve. So I look back and go, okay, what would I have done differently? And in hindsight, nothing. Like, I was always going to be that way. I could have gone back and told myself, like many people did, you're going to burn out, you're going to burn out, you're going to burn out. It's like, I don't fucking care. It's like, there's my goal. What's the fastest way to it? And no one's going to tell me otherwise. And that's the kind of mindset you need to be successful. But it comes at a huge cost.
And am I right in saying that putting in a CEO in place of yourself wouldn't have solved that issue?
No, because a CEO just adds a whole nother layer of paranoia. So the people who are successful, they're generally paranoid. So what you're them thinking about is, what's the CEO doing?
Also had the same motivation, tenacity that you would have.
No way. I've talked to companies now where there's like a parachute CEO in there and he's got 10% of the business. I'm like, not motivated. Even if he's got 10%, it's like, why would you kill yourself for his company, her company? Why would you? You've got to have screws loose. That's why, a VC. You start a VC today, what'd you look for? Trauma. Someone really fucked up. Because, like, honestly, it sounds really like taboo to say that, but you go, okay, the money. You can't see it. Occasionally you see big valuations and all that, but like the bigger valuation you have, it means that your exit has to be 5 times that. Otherwise, you're going to get squeezed to nothing and end up not getting an exit ever. Fame, you might get 5 minutes of it. Power, like they're the kind of 3 ugly ones that I see a lot of the time. Power being probably the biggest one, where people like to be in a seat where they've got command and power over others. And that's true for all humans, in all walks of life. And there's only so much money can buy, and then power takes over, right? But ultimately, if you're not doing it for some other reason that isn't burning you up every day, like fear or a point to prove or something that's illogical, if you're doing a business out of pure logic, you can probably be successful, but you're not going to be like unicorn successful or like super successful. And I don't know where I am on the scheme of things, but I would say that the journey I've led has been fairly difficult. But I wouldn't have had it any other way. Obviously I've punished my body and brain a lot, but you live once. So what I'm trying to do now is educate other founders about the reality of running a startup. Stop going to startup events and listening to VCs. Or if you go there and you listen to them, actually check out that they've founded a business before. I constantly see on LinkedIn all the time, reverse pitch. And I look at the guys on the pitch, I'm like, you've never started a business in your life. You've never started a business in your life, and you are like a CTO at a business. It's like, so look for the genuine people, basically. Like, but then again, there's a catch-22, because generally speaking, people who have had exits are off never to be seen again. Or if they are, they generally don't have a huge amount of time. So it is hard to catch that knowledge. And you're talking now to obviously founders who've had some success in the last 10 years. And that's probably the first generation of success we've had as a country in tech, maybe like 5 years, really. Like, if you take out the real big guys, there's not much left. Take out Atlassian, Canva, Afterpay, like the real big exits. Or you go the other end of the spectrum where you got, like the Richard Weiss and WiseTech and those sorts of companies. But he'd be in a different classification to like me, right? He's obviously a lot more successful, but he's so much older, and like that's a generational company. The thing I would end on is that it's only getting harder for founders now. And I think founders need to cut themselves some slack, in the sense that they're going to feel guilty and like they're not doing enough because of the technical advancements that we've made in the world. And particularly if you're a tech company, you can be global day one. You can spin up a platform on Amazon or GCP real quick, and you can go and work in England and the US, and you can work virtually anywhere straight away. Now, the problem with that is then there's no downtime ever. There's no weekends. There's no hours in the day where you can't be working. And so then you're never forgiving yourself for taking a break. Back in the old days, 50, 60 years ago, when technology wasn't as quick, you couldn't make a phone call at 3 a.m. You couldn't work outside your prescribed amount of hours. I mean, there are exceptions, you could, but nowadays the speed at which things are moving, that's why I called my business Rocket Ship, right? Originally I was, bit of energy post-sale. Now I've got no fucking energy again, but post-sale, it was like, okay, why did you call it Rocket Ship? It says, I believe, and again, everyone's entitled to an opinion, but I believe in this day and age, if you are not looking for an exit between 3 and 4 years, you will not make it. It's not to say you need to get one in that time, but there's 2 reasons I say that. One is that by the time you got to the 5-year mark, your market is probably, if you've solved a good problem, being solved by everyone else at the same time, and you become in a sea of sameness, and your competitive landscape becomes extremely hard. And it's normally the one with the most amount of money that wins, which is usually a US business. Take a breath. The second thing is you've got to move quick. I have these arguments all the time with bootstrappers. It's better to be bootstrapped, control my cap table. It's like, since when did money control your cap table? Like, give away 20% for 5 mil and you fucking fly out the door. Like, if you go too slow and you've solved a real problem, there is some other smart boy, girl around the world that is solving it at the same time you, and they'll solve it faster, and they'll be out in market faster.
Thank you so much, Brad.
All good.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me.